Welcome back to another episode of The Conscious Artist, a safe space for conversations around mental health awareness for musicians, artists, and all human beings. I am your host, Pallavi Mahidara. I'm a concert pianist and teacher, and I am absolutely thrilled that you are joining us today. My hope for this show is that it will give all of us a sense of solidarity and knowledge that we are not alone, and together, through these conversations, we can create more awareness and change for a healthier future. Today's guest is a longtime colleague and friend. We met while studying together at the Curtis Institute of Music and recently got to reconnect in Iceland, of all places, over music, food, and the Northern Lights at the amazing Tertulia Chamber Music Festival. A mother of four, a phenomenal violinist, and a professor, she has so much insight to share. So please join me in welcoming Lily Francis to The Conscious Artist. Lily, I'm so happy you could be here with us today.
Thanks for having me, Pallavi. It's a real pleasure to be on your podcast.
I'm so looking forward to our conversation. I enjoyed so much everything we spoke about in Iceland, and I particularly felt that we have a lot to speak about regarding teaching. You know, things are very different now from when we were students, both in what the younger generations experience as their quote-unquote daily life, but also in how we experienced being taught growing up. And although we are forever students as artists, there comes a point where we have to learn how to be our own teacher. And that's something that I really try to work on with my students. And it's been a big journey for me learning how to not only be my own teacher, but how to teach them how to be their own teachers. And so I'm really curious to know, when did that point come for you and how were you able to navigate that new chapter?
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, I absolutely consider myself, even though I have been a professor now for 7 years, officially I have a professorship and I've been teaching, but I also absolutely consider myself still a student. I hope to grow until I die. And I feel like I'm learning all the time about how to be a better teacher. The more students I meet, the more individuals I get to know, the more it's clear to me that everybody is absolutely unique and they all require a completely unique way of teaching. I don't know. I find the interesting thing about the word teaching is that it sort of implies something that's one-sided. You have a teacher and you have a student, that a teacher is teaching somebody something, which of course we are, because we have a lot of knowledge. This is the reason that we teach, is that we feel like we have something to give to somebody else. We have something that might help somebody else on their journey to whatever that might be, finding their musical voice or playing something technically in a better way. But what I really strive to do in my teaching, and I'm still learning about it, is I feel like it needs to be a collaborative process. And I think that's a more modern idea. I think I grew up in a different context of, the teacher really was somebody, and this is a blanket statement, and not all of my teachers were like this, but the traditional role of a teacher was to be revered, to be listened to be obeyed in some cases. It was, I think, quite a strict role. And I don't know, I also loved my teachers, even if they were strict, if I use those words. And I think we as a society have grown in many ways. I think students have grown. I think students are more self-aware these days. And I think teachers, as a result, have also been forced to grow in a different way. Like the student-teacher relationship is a really special relationship and can be very influential. And I think that today, with today's young people, it has to be a collaborative endeavor. So not strictly, I'm going to teach you something, but also constantly being in touch with the student about what they think they need, because these are the things that they're going to be able to learn better, actually.
Wow, I really love that. I love how you say collaborative experience, collaborative process. And I think it's so funny the way you described our student-teacher process when we were growing up, because it so reminded me, especially once I moved to Europe and I had a very strict Russian professor who was, almost 80 years old and very set in his ways and one of the greatest artists of his generation. I remember people sort of warning me before I came to study with him that it was going to be his way or the highway.
Mm.
And like Bashkirov was famous for this. It was his way or the highway.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the first time I went to play for him, I mean, it was like one of the most terrifying experiences I'd ever had because I started playing the first movement of a Beethoven sonata and the first movement went fine. And he said a few things. And then we got to the second movement and like from the first chord, he started screaming. I was like,
Oh, terrifying.
I had never experienced that because I grew up in America where you didn't really experience that. I wonder, I wanted to ask if some of the teachers that you were speaking about were teachers that you studied with in America, or was it once you moved to Europe? Because you and I both have that America versus Europe instruction in our student history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess growing up in America, I think I had a number of really positive teacher-student relationships. I had some really great teachers, and I look back to one in particular who was, I guess, when we think of stereotypically American now living in Europe, I think of this unbounded positivity, this really exaggerated sense of possibility and hopefulness and optimism. And I had a teacher like that when I was a teenager.
That's such a nice way to put it, by the way.
And I think, those were absolutely the right things for me at that time. He had me believing as a teenager that I could play anything. I honestly, I look back to that time. I think it was so formative to have that sort of support and to honestly, that he supported me in such a way that I believed in myself. And that's my goal also, of course, with my students is I think to be able to learn anything, we have to be confident in what we're doing. We have to feel like we're capable of doing things, and we have to feel like we do a number of things well. And I don't lie to my students ever. I'm not going to tell them they do something well when they don't. But I think it's important to bolster them or the qualities that they already possess to let them know that they're doing so many things correctly, because playing the piano or playing the violin or playing any instrument is incredibly difficult. And to get to the point, I teach college students to get to the point where you're really studying, you're going to be a professional musician, you can already do so many things, regardless of who you are, when you're at a university level. And I always hold this positivity towards me. I've had, as we all probably have had, encounters with the other side, sort of the dark side, let's call it, with teachers who pedagogically aren't operating in an optimum way, let's say it politely like that, where they operate more on a fear basis, or they're actually blatantly abusive in some way. And I always feel like this is at a disservice to the student. I know this is where we came from. And I think it stems from, you were saying, Bashkirov, a great artist, undeniably great. There's a certain sense of when students come to a great artist, there should be a respect there of what he accomplished in his lifetime, in his artistic career. Of course, we need to respect that. I think what's developed is respect in the other direction, or I like to hope that teachers today also respect their students as people and as artists and as people who are making themselves very vulnerable in this one-on-one situation, trying to learn something from somebody else who knows a little bit more. But in order to do that, you have to be very vulnerable, actually.
I couldn't agree more. And I love the way you've illuminated the point that draws the parallel between, at least for me, between teaching today and parenting today.
Absolutely. Amen.
And what we experienced, and I cannot speak personally as a parent, but my sister's a parent, a lot of my friends are parents, and I know, what I experienced with my own parents, and I see what, all of my colleagues in around my age and my generation, what we experienced growing up. And then you also have the immigrant parent to add on top of that. Then you have the Indian parent on top of that. So there were a lot of parallels for me between the fear-based respect in Indian culture and the fear-based respect in the music world with certain professors. And I have to say that I was very fortunate to have the most incredible professors, and even someone like Bashkirov who, would scream to get his way. It wasn't about getting his way. I recognized very early on, at least with me, that it was very much about bringing me to reach my potential. And whatever he was, frustrated about, he was yelling because he was frustrated. Maybe also because he wasn't taught to manage his emotions in a healthy way. That's fine. But what he was yelling about was for the sake of the music, for the quality of the music, and for the potential that I could reach and that his students could reach. And I want to make it very clear that I don't think it's at all necessary or even, may I say, acceptable to conduct yourself in a manner that is sort of parallel to a 5-year-old having a temper tantrum.
Terrorizing, yeah.
Right,
Exactly.
terrorizing.
Yeah.
I do want to make the clear distinction between what's a generational difference and what's just plain abusive.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with you. I think there are, I would say, two branches that I see. And I've always dealt better as a student with the teachers who I know that at the base of their screaming and being hard on me, that it was in service of the music, that they wanted, like you're saying, to really, really get the most out of a student with respect to playing the music as it should be played, and because they love the music and they respect the music as well. There's a difference between that sort of teacher and I think a teacher who's not in touch with themselves and is simply repeating some sort of abusive circle that they experienced also as a student back in the day. And I've encountered both times. And I think, yeah, the sort of the second category that is actually abusive and is sort of unable to come away from this abusive cycle that they're probably also a part of has a lot to do with ego, or has a lot to do with not being reflective or not really considering this. I also agree with you that I think it's generational. I think that this sort of behavior at one time was absolutely acceptable, and today we don't accept it anymore, as we shouldn't. It's not appropriate to ask young adults to forgive us for the traumas that we are enacting on them.
Right.
I feel like that's a little bit what I see with now colleagues, with older colleagues, who I wouldn't say they're terrorizing, but there are psychological games that get played in their studios. And it hurts me for the students' sake, because I feel like that's sort of baggage that they shouldn't have to deal with. That said, I feel like it's our job as teachers to be aware of the traumas that we have experienced and to deal with them before we get to the point where we need to pass them on to our students to sort of work through them. I feel like that's a really important part of being a teacher, is being reflective and examining, why am I commenting on this passage with a student? Why am I focused on this? Oftentimes it's because it is a problematic thing that we're trying to fix with a student, that we need to find a way to solve a certain problem in the music. But sometimes it does come from a place of, oh, I remember my teacher really harped on me for that part. Or, oh, I remember, like, I'm not allowed to play this way in this part, you know? And I think it's worth examining those things, like how we teach, whether it comes from a place of, if I'm really overstating it, I would say abuse, or a place of trauma from when we were learning, or whether it's actually something that you're registering from the student's point of view.
I love the way you've articulated this, and I could not agree more. I wonder if we can draw the parallel here, which I guess would make sense. The teachers that most of us, at least most of us that are professional musicians now in the classical music world, most of us studied with teachers that were around the ages of our grandparents. And I would venture to guess that they experienced the same kind of traumas that our grandparents experienced.
Absolutely. Sure.
At that generation, there was a lot of hardship that had to be dealt with on a daily basis. And there was no room for, let's take a moment to sit with our feelings.
Yes.
You know, going to therapy was considered, oh, you're crazy. You need to see someone. You need to see a psychiatrist. You need to see a psychologist. You're crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was so much trauma that, yes, not only generational trauma, but also historical trauma that was happening at that time. And so it was just a matter of survival for a lot of that generation. It was just one foot in front of the other.
And I think perhaps even studying an instrument, if you were a student back then, you know, this was perhaps your way to a different type of life. I can also imagine that there was an immense amount of pressure to really work hard. I don't know, to study with Heifetz. And I know that Heifetz was not a modern teacher, you know, and to sort of take this kind of abuse in the hopes that you would make it, that you would get out of whatever situation you were in and sort of graduate to a new life. I agree with you that today, exactly, you absolutely have the luxury of living in a peaceful society where we have options. There are so many things open to today's children and young people. And it's absolutely worth it to remember that to our grandparents and to their teachers, that was not the case. This was certainly something that you would take seriously. And it was maybe your way out. It was maybe a way to a new life, a different kind of life.
And of course, this is not to excuse fear-based / abusive behavior, but to be able to understand where people come from and to be able to, I guess, to be able to show compassion and empathy and understanding of someone different than you allows a healthier path towards acceptance and then change, right?
Absolutely.
I would love to talk more about how you implement sort of collaborative teaching methods. I remember we talked about it a little bit in Iceland, and I'm really curious to see and also to learn from you because I know you're a phenomenal teacher. I totally agree with you that every student is unique and every student has to have, in a way, individualized teaching. At least this is the way I feel strongly as a teacher. I've been teaching privately for, like 20 years now. And so I've also had my own evolution with teaching as I've grown as a human being, as I've grown as an artist, as I've literally just matured with age, gone through life experiences. All of this has also shaped how I approach my students now. And while there are some things that are kind of blanket in my method, which, for example, is you should not have pain when you play.
For sure.
So if you have pain, let's talk about it.
For sure.
Or, for example, breathing. Breathing is a staple. Every single one of my students has heard me talk about breathing because it's a fundamental aspect of living a healthy, and when I say healthy, I mean physically and mentally healthy experience with your instrument. So things like that are kind of blanket with me. This is just about sort of even my own lifestyle and what I truly believe in as a human being. That being said, I need to be able to respond to what the student needs in that moment. And, before we started recording, you mentioned a little bit about Yumi's episode. Yumi Kendall, she and I also spoke about that. And I loved the way she described her teaching methods where, she'll ask like, what is it that you want to work on? Or like, what is it that you need? And sometimes the student will say, I need this. And Yumi would say, okay, great, let's work on that. And sometimes, she would say, I feel that this is where you could benefit. And the student may or may not agree. But ultimately, they would actually get to the point where both of them were working on the things that were most beneficial.
That needed to be worked on. Yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And so I'm really curious to know how you approach it.
What I really liked what you just said was talking about what you value or what you consider sort of blanket method, the things that you sort of like your values that you would like to impart to a student by the time they leave you or decide to go somewhere else. You sort of have hoped that they've taken a few things from you. I think that these things are inherently different for each teacher because as teachers, we only have our own experience. There are hopefully varied and lots of experiences that we've had with different teachers, with different students. But in the end, I'm Lily Francis. I have my experience of the world and of music. That's what I can teach a student. I can't teach someone else what Maxim Vengerov's experience in the world is. I don't know what that is. I know what I have to give. So that's sort of what I would call like the pillars of my teaching, at least, are the things that I've experienced, the things that I know. And then, like you were suggesting, there has to be this collaboration or exchange of ideas between or understanding between a student and a teacher. Because I would say in my class right now, I would say 80% of the people have completely different body types than I do. Their hands are shaped differently. Their arms are longer or shorter. The way they stand, their shapes, everything about them, the length of their neck, all of the things that go into sort of the angles of violin playing, 80% of them are completely different. I have no idea what it's like to live in their bodies. I don't know what that is. I can, like you say, we can talk about breathing. We can talk about standing in a good way, in a centered way, regardless of body type, talking about the alignment of the spine and the hips and really placing that and feeling grounded in our feet. And honestly, with the students where we have completely different backgrounds, which I would say is also about 90% of the time, we all come from different places. It's a lot of talking. I ask them, like Yumi was suggesting as well, does that feel right? Can you try, let's try this. It's a lot of problem solving. It's a lot of troubleshooting. Saying, well, I hear this shift isn't working. Can you try putting your elbow under? Does that work for you? No, that's too tight. Okay, well, let's see can we adjust the angle of the wrist? Does that help you? Let's try. Or let's try, can you try thinking light fingers? Or there are any number of suggestions that we can do, because in the end, I don't know what it's like to be them. I can empathize and I can imagine. I have a very good imagination, and I like to think that I can feel what another person is feeling. But at the end of the day, I don't know for sure. So it's all about the communication. And I think that's what makes it really collaborative. I like to also, sort of as a side note, establish a safe place as the lesson studio. I make it really clear when I meet a student sort of in the first year that we work together that I don't want them to apologize. I don't think they need to apologize for anything that happens in a lesson. And I want them to try things. And a lot of times we're in a lesson and I say, okay, we need to work on the bow arm, for example. I don't care what your intonation is right now. Play out of tune. Doesn't matter. I'm not listening to that. Like, let's try and really free the bow arm. But we ignore certain parts. We do things that are ugly in a lesson, in a private space, as we should be also doing in our practice studios, in order to try and solve problems. And if we feel like we're free and like we're safe, then we can explore all sorts of options. I'm also totally open to the fact that what looks terrible in someone's playing might sound really good. And I'm a big fan of, if it's not broken, if nobody's in pain, if it looks really strange and it seems to be working, I'm not going to touch it. I feel like that's also part of the flexibility of recognizing that each person is totally different. And we all have to come up with a solution for how to play our instruments and how to be effective.
I love that you brought up the physicality of playing. You could not have said it better. It's so incredibly important to recognize that we are not built the same way as human beings. And I say this to my students all the time. The tools that I'm giving you are what work for me. But my body is absolutely not going to be the same as yours. Yes, we have similar anatomy, but that doesn't mean we feel the same, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my purpose in what I teach them is to find, and this has been my goal, and I'm constantly continuing to search for healthier options, but my goal as an artist with the physicality of playing is to find the way where I can use minimum effort for maximum result.
Mm-hmm.
I've said this in other episodes, in other seasons, and I'll just sort of recap and re-clarify what I mean by that. It's to be as efficient as possible with what I have and to learn how to use my muscles and my body and my joints and everything in the most efficient way for my body.
Mm-hmm.
Which means then there's very little room for pain. There's very little room for superfluous movements. Like, it's just down to the core. What is it that you need in order to produce this quality of sound in this chord?
Mm-hmm.
Are you able to feel different parts of your body? And that's also another thing that I think that you highlighted without saying it directly, but you highlighted, and I also try to do this with my students. Like, are you aware of your body? Are you actually aware of every part of your body and how it feels when you are doing different movements? Or are you playing automatically?
Mm-hmm.
And, we know that so many times it happens that students are playing and they don't even realize. Like, I will tell them, for example, with pianists, very often when octaves are tight, it's because our elbows are tight.
Mm.
And people don't think about that. People think about their hands or their wrists, especially their wrists. And of course, like, if you have a tight wrist, it's like you're choking your throat. Like I draw that parallel for them because the air needs to be able to flow through your body, into your arms, into your hands. But there's an exercise that I had learned with a teacher long ago about sound production and how to sort of identify all the different parts of your body as you're playing a chord. And so whenever I'm teaching a masterclass and I hear a lot of tightness in someone's sound, or like a very kind of harsh, ugly sound quality, or I can see, like, even without hearing their sound, I can just see what they look like. And this also, I'll come back to the point about if it's not broken, don't fix it.
Yeah.
But if I can see that there's just like a lot of tension in their body, there's this really cool exercise that I learned where, you just take like a C major chord in both hands and play the chord just from your fingers. And so identify how it feels to play just from your fingers.
Mm-hmm.
Then the next time, play it just from your wrists. So then your fingers are free, but you're playing only from your wrists and you're moving only your wrists.
Right.
Then you play from your elbows. So now you're thinking about the movement coming from your elbows and sort of a forward motion into the piano lid.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're playing from your shoulders. And so now you're thinking about releasing your arms because you're trying to concentrate on like making a sort of circular shoulder movement.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're playing from your shoulder blades. And so now you're kind of expanding your shoulder blades like a bird. And so now your whole kind of upper body is more free. And then finally, playing from your lower back, playing from, your butt, playing from your legs, like because we're seated, right? Playing from
Mm-hmm.
your whole body, feeling your whole lower half of your body as one entity and playing from that and allowing your entire body weight to flow into the piano. And that I remember was such an incredible physical experience for me to be able to stop and identify point by point in my body how I feel.
To isolate it, yeah.
Yes, to isolate it. And I can draw some parallels with that with, for anyone that does yoga or maybe meditation or maybe Pilates or any sort of isolation exercises.
Mm.
We're more aware, or we learn to be more aware of all the different parts of our body. And, if you're sitting doing a meditation and you're hearing the guide or the instructor or the teacher say, on your next exhale, relax your jaw. How many of us think about our jaws on a daily basis? Like our jaws are probably tense the whole day.
For sure. Exactly. Yeah, with friends and colleagues, we always used to, well, actually with my husband as well, who's a violinist as well. Sometimes we pass each other in the kitchen and say, posture check. It's like, oh, yes. So what was I doing with my back just now, just in everyday life? Yeah, to be reminded of there could be another way to put your body.
And it's just this idea of like conscious practicing, conscious awareness
Mm-hmm.
with our instrument. And when I talk about mental health with your instrument, when I talk about physical health with your instrument, and I say conscious practicing, conscious awareness, conscious thinking, it literally just means like, are you aware of what you're doing? Are you paying attention or are you playing on autopilot?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There was something that you said before about learning to be your own teacher. And I often think that it's developing this sort of awareness. Like as a teacher, we are standing on the outside and we say what we see or we say what we think we feel to a student. We're trying to help them open their ears or open their sensitivity to different things, to either to their body or to how they listen to something. Where in the end, being your own teacher is developing a critical, constructive voice that can analyze you as if you're standing outside of yourself. I like to think that this sort of awareness or being sensitive to how your body is or listening to yourself playing is cultivated by all the teachers that you've had in your life. I know that I can recall, what would Mr. Silverstein say? That's a good question that I ask often. Or my teacher from when I was a teenager, what would Brian say? Or what would Miriam say? And I have a very clear voice for all of these teachers that I carry with me. I hope that's what we're developing by someone learning to be their own teacher, is that they carry their teachers with them, but they also know what they value as a person and what they find is effective for them. And that becomes their inner voice. As a teacher, we try to help them develop a productive and constructive inner voice.
Absolutely. I literally do the same. Like I have Bashkirov's voice. Like for years, it was like just screaming in my ear about sound quality.
That sounds really, really tough.
But I mean, like post lessons, like while I was practicing, she's like always there. But that is what has trained my ear. That is truly what's trained my ear now. Like I learned to hear music in a completely different way. And I don't mean that in an abstract way. I mean that in a literal way, like to hear sound, how to listen for good quality sound and how to produce good quality sound and do the two at the same time.
Sure.
All of this, like active listening, all of this came from Bashkirov. And then I have my high school teacher, which was Julian Martin. He taught me how to feel physically comfortable at the piano. That was such an invaluable lesson to have at such like sort of a young age, because I started when I was 12 with him. And so I learned for my most formative years, as a teenager, to feel relaxed at the piano as much as was possible at the time. I wasn't very conscious at that time in terms of what I was doing. And so it was more kind of mirroring or copying or just doing what I was being told. And this also brings up another point, which you just alluded to, which is sort of the difference between how we were taught from previous generations, where there was a lot of spoon feeding, versus trying to teach our kids to be their own teacher, be their own parent. And again, I'm going to draw parallels between parenting today versus previous generations.
Which I think is completely, that was something that I wanted to bring up as well. Is I feel like when I teach, I parent ideally in the same way that I teach, or I teach in the same way that I parent, which is based on respect, sort of a mutual respect between two human beings.
Absolutely.
And I feel like exactly as it is with young children, they're learning to walk, and you have to let them fall down. You have to let them try all sorts of things. You have to let them try walking on grass and walking on pavement and falling down on grass and falling down on pavement and trying to step up a step. How does that work? And in terms of spoon feeding, I mean, with something so complex like learning to walk, it's really important for the brain to be able to make mistakes. I think that we all learn from our mistakes far more than we learn from our successes.
Yeah.
It's proven that we need to make mistakes in order to form new pathways in our brain. And in the same way, and this is why I like to have the teaching studio, and I also tell my students at home, in your practice room, it's a safe space. Do stuff that's ridiculous. Do stuff that's ugly. Do stuff that's risky. Practice being risky and finding ways that are not traditional to do something. Really do things that are ridiculous that you wouldn't do in public, of course. It's a private space. But we need to be able to fall down on our instruments as well. We need to be able to find out, okay, that doesn't work. We also need to have a productive voice in our head. Like I have 4 kids. I have a 2, 4, and a 6 and an 8-year-old. And I've watched them all. They're all running around, They do such risky things. Sometimes I can't watch the older ones, they're climbing trees. It's like I think to myself, oh my God, they're going to fall. They're going to do something. And they do fall. You know what? They have scraped knees from time to time. We haven't broken any bones, but I have to trust my children at some point to find their own boundaries, to find what they're comfortable doing, and to find what risk they're okay with. Of course, this is within the realm of safety. I'm always trying to make sure that they're safe and that it's not a ridiculous risk that they're taking, but they need to be able to take risks. And I find the same thing with my students, that I need to give them the safety in a lesson as well, to come in and to say, okay, let's try something. Let's really go for it. And if they fall on their faces, we don't stand there and say like, well, you're stupid, or well, that was terrible. We say, how interesting. This is sort of the inner voice that I'm also really trying to cultivate with my students, is that when something happens that doesn't work right, or is not how you expected, or is not what you ideally wanted to produce, that we stand there, and instead of immediately judging negatively, we have to try and build in this voice that says, how interesting. Why? We have to have this curiosity, and that's a constructive mindset. And I think is also related to watching my kids, what happens when you don't do your homework? Oh, interesting. Did the teacher get mad? Did you get a bad grade? It's like, interesting, there needs to be some sort of stepping back and letting people discover what actually happens when when you do something, or when you don't do something, or when you don't put your elbow under. Interesting, didn't make the shift. What can we do differently next time?
Can I come study with you? Seriously, I have so much to learn from you.
That's really sweet. That's really sweet.
Seriously, I feel like I have so much to learn. And I'm just thinking about the way and of course, in theory, with all the therapy I've done and all the tools I've learned, I'm like, yes, you should be kind to yourself. Don't get mad if something doesn't work. Be curious about it. And then something doesn't happen. I'm like, Pallavi, you're so stupid.
Well, this is the inner voice. Exactly. And this is the inner voice that we've all been trained when we're high functioning professional musicians. We've all been trained to be incredibly critical. And oftentimes the critical voice is very mean. And that's why getting to know students, I really say, I don't need you to apologize for that. A lot of times people come in, we don't know each other well, and they apologize. I'm sorry, that was so out of tune. And I say, why was it so out of tune? Not in a mean way at all. I always come from a place of curiosity. Like, let's talk about it. Why do you think it was out of tune? well, I didn't warm up, or, I'm having a bad day, or I don't know, I drank too much coffee. Or
But those are all relevant
exactly,
factors.
these are all relevant factors that they should also be aware of, So talking about it gives them an opportunity to examine, maybe before the next lesson, I won't have the third coffee of the day. Or maybe before my next concert, I will get some more sleep. Or maybe, I don't know, any of these things. Or maybe I'll book a warm-up room before my next lesson so that I can have 15 minutes to really play some scales. That there are always solutions to things. I find it's really all about approaching each situation and giving people the chance without judgment to really look at the reasons for things.
Absolutely. I love that you start off by telling your students there's no need to apologize. I'm going to steal this from you, if that's okay, because I also, whenever my students do apologize, I say, I don't care if you play wrong notes. And I love that
Right,
you said, I
sure.
don't care if you play out of tune. For us, it's wrong notes more, right?
Mm.
So I don't care if you play wrong notes, but make music,
Mm.
enjoy, have
Mm.
fun with it, discover something new.
Yeah, having fun. Oh my goodness. I was listening to your podcast with Dr. Trabau, and I loved what she said about playing in the best situations when we're in a concert setting or in a lesson, whatever, and we feel like we're playing, like we're having fun. That's when we can really do great things. Either that's doing great things means learning, or doing great things means being in the zone, having a great performance. I feel like this is really something that I also really treasure from my teenage years, from this incredibly positive teacher that I had. Was he came up with the most ridiculous things in our lessons to do. And I just remember laughing so much and smiling. And this for me as a teenager was monumental, because I was a very dark teenager. Shostakovich appealed to me greatly during those years.
As it should.
I was really an introvert. And in these lessons, he had me dancing around in ridiculous ways. He had me screaming things. He had me laughing. We were making jokes. And I would say this is sort of the optimum environment for learning. And as a result, I really try to do that. I'm ridiculous. I would say to this day, I'm still a bit of an introvert. I'm not terribly gregarious. I don't think of myself as particularly outgoing, but in a lesson, I can turn into this thing that just wants people to smile. I want them to laugh. I want them to move their feet. I dance for them in ridiculous ways, just to get them into a positive place, into a ridiculous place where we can have fun together. And I think that's a really productive thing for a lot of them. I think they've also grown up in a terribly serious environment learning classical music. It's terribly serious business. And if we can sort of free ourselves to make jokes, to find Mozart funny, to find some ridiculous image that actually makes us smile when we play, the endorphins that get released, the release of tension that can happen when we just smile as we're playing is huge.
It's confirmed. I'm going to come study with you. I fixed my violin up.
Great.
And
Get it going, Pallavi.
I'm going to come.
I teach in Salzburg. You can come to Salzburg.
Yeah, I'm going to come to the Mozarteum, and I'm going to enter as a violinist. No, I'm just kidding.
Fantastic. I would love to have you.
No, but seriously, I'm learning so much from you. I have one last question for you.
Sure.
How do you think we can train students out of the mindset that a great performance is just playing note perfectly without mistakes, playing in tune, not having a memory slip, but then, the music suffers? How do we train them out of the mindset that that's not what a great performance is? Or maybe it's a personal thing. I don't know. For me, a great performance is when I'm moved. I don't care if you make mistakes. I don't care if you left out a whole page because you had a memory slip.
Yes.
But if I was moved, okay, yes, if it happens every time, maybe there's an issue. And again, get curious about it. Let's go to the root. Let's see, is it that you're having a roadblock with memory, or is it that you just didn't practice enough?
Sure.
Or was it that your practicing was too automatic and not, you can find the reasons, but I'm constantly trying to get my students to make music and enjoy, to understand that I don't care if it's perfect, because there is no such thing as perfect.
Sure. I think I talk a lot about a pendulum in my teaching also. And I think about a pendulum a lot in my life in many different ways, that we sort of swing from one extreme to another. And we're always kind of trying to slow the pendulum down so that we find the happy medium in the beginning, whatever it is about, family work balance, or in teaching, finding the balance between really going for it and making a musical and emotional statement with your playing, and sort of at the other extreme, playing incredibly perfectly. And I don't think the two are mutually exclusive, but I think it's rare that that's easy for a person to combine the two.
Mm.
And I think that playing technically better can be supported by musicality, by certain musical ideas, that when we're really convinced of an idea, actually that the technique works better. And I also think that when we have a strong technical base, then our musical ideas are obviously easier to communicate. And I think with most people, it's finding a balance, or we're on this pendulum. And most of what I experience with most of my students is that we go back and forth. There are some people who get really into perfecting their technique. And you're right, the musicality suffers at that point. And at that point, our lessons become more about, they're focused on the technique. And I remind them, let's let go a little bit, let's find, what is the character? What are you really doing here? Is this really about a scale, or is it a giant flourish? Is it something really exciting that we need to be flying into the air? On the other hand, there are people who need a little nudge in the other direction. They go crazy with all sorts of musical ideas, and they're full of inspiration, and they always come in and they sort of lose their center technically. The bow is going all over the string, or they can't really play in tune because they're feeling this romanticism in a certain piece so well that they sort of lose their sight of the technique. And I feel like my job is sort of, to send the pendulum a little bit in the other direction at that point, to talk to them about, let's do this slowly. Let's take out the vibrato. Let's do it in a really objective way for a minute. I mean, I totally agree with you. And then the thing that I love to do with them is actually ask them about their violin heroes, about my violin students, and who is your hero? Who do you like to listen to playing? And they're all different. You get the gamut of all of the great soloists today. And inevitably, it does come out. It's like, well, what do you like about their playing? And with all of them, I say, she's like a wild animal on stage. And I think, oh, wow, okay, that's what we're going for with this student. Or another one says, he's so refined. I just feel like his sound is so beautiful. It makes me cry. These sort of reactions. And then we talk about the fact, like, well, you're not telling me it's because he has the best intonation you've ever heard,
right,
or that he's made you've checked the box on every shift in this piece. You're telling me that you love the spirit of what he's doing, or this golden sound, this loving sound, whatever it is, or this wild woman on stage who really goes for it and rips her violin practically apart. Let's try and go for that in your piece. Let's, for a minute in this safe space, let's put our technique to the side, or let's use our technique to really go for these things that you love about other performers and that maybe you're trying to emulate. Sometimes that helps. I don't know. I agree with you. It's something that is, I also have to remind myself, frankly, in my professional playing career, again and again, that the music is supported by good technique. That means doing some slow practice. And on the other hand, also in concerts, just go for it. Practice the risk at home, take the risks in the concert, go for it. It is risky, but I agree with you. I'd much rather be moved than listen to somebody play, perfect.
Yeah, it's so interesting because when I was younger, I would say until my mid-20s, I kind of resigned to the fact that I will never be a quote unquote note perfect pianist. Because yes, while I had quite decent technique and there were some things that were really my forte, like octaves or scales or like passage work, like some things were really good. And then other things like double thirds, can't play double thirds. And I've just resigned to that fact, and it's okay. But I was always told, but also I felt that my greatest strength was my musicality. That like I led from my musicality, that I am instinctively a very musical person. And like I feel the music a lot and very deeply. But it's only in the last 10 years that I've learned how to apply my technique to enhance the music. And this is what I try to help my students with. And it's, in fact, I would say like my technique has improved greatly in the flip side by not teaching myself, by being taught by Bashkirov how to listen, to refine my ear. Refining my ear has refined my technique. And what I mean by that is the fact that he would not let one note slip by.
Mm-hmm.
Like literally a lesson the whole hour could be just on the first two bars
Mm-hmm.
sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And while maybe that much detail also was a little bit difficult because I would get so stuck in the details, and it's taken the last 10 years to find that distance, to find that perspective and be able to kind of zoom out and see like, oh, that's what he meant. Oh, okay, I see, and kind of put the puzzle together. But that helped in such an important way to have, and I hate using this word, but I don't know what other word to use, like to have control at the instrument, have mastery. Let's say that. Have
I think that's
mastery
better. Yeah.
at the instrument. Because yes, it's
Mm-hmm.
exactly that, like moving away from control, but rather feeling that you are a master of what you're doing.
Yes.
And that, of course, is going to change from day to day. And that's, of course, going to change from hour to hour and minute to minute, even, and passage
Yeah.
to passage. But that's where the consciousness and the awareness comes in. Like, for example, like let's say I'm playing a passage and it's got a jump in it, a big jump. And I'm playing it, I missed the jump the first time. Now, when I'm playing, I'm not going to just play it again automatically and
Right.
hope that the second time will happen. I immediately consciously say, okay, why did I miss that? But let's go back 10 years. I would miss it the first time. I'd miss it the second time. But by the third time, if I'm still missing it in the same way, I'm going to start asking why. What is it that I need to do? Is my arm tense? Is my neck tight? Am I like clenching my jaw and therefore holding tension in my entire upper body? Do I need to just kind of rotate my hand a little bit here? You know, there's I've quoted this before in this podcast, but there's a quote that's attributed to Einstein, which is the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results.
Yes.
That draws directly to conscious practicing, conscious thinking, conscious playing. And I remember Nick Kendall said something in the episode I did with him back in the first season. He said, freedom comes from discipline. And this feeling of like being able to feel free on stage, like what you were saying, like take risks, just being able to let go, that comes with practicing taking
Absolutely.
risks.
Practice the risk.
Yes,
Absolutely.
exactly. And so that idea of, I say this to my students, like practice what you want to do on stage in the practice room. And exaggerate. And that's why I tell them like practice slowly, because you have time to exaggerate everything so that when you play it in tempo on stage in the concert with all your nerves, at least like 70% of it will be there if you're practicing like 250%.
Yes, exactly. Oh, you're bringing up all sorts of teachers are like clamoring around in my head right now. It's great. I hear Miriam Fried right now, who used to also talk about, if you want to play something in a concert at about 90%, then you have to get it in the practice room to about 150%. There's a huge loss that happens under pressure and under performing circumstances. And I think about that often. With my students, and also focusing on that careful practice and that really aware, conscious practice. I think Yumi said something about that as well, that you always have to change something. When you practice something, there has to be some sort of change. Otherwise, there's no reason to do it again.
Oh my God, I could talk to you for hours. Like we have so much more to talk about, but we'll leave that for another day.
We can leave it.
Really, thank you so much for being here. This was such an interesting conversation. You've highlighted so many really important points, I think, for both teachers and students, and also for myself. Like I said, like I really want to come study with you now.
Oh, thank you.
And I just really look forward to not only continuing this conversation with you and with our colleagues and with our students, but also as a movement, hopefully to continue this evolution of teaching. Also, like we said, drawing the parallels with parenting and, how we're changing, sort of breaking the cycles of the previous generations' trauma being passed down.
Exactly. Deciding on the positive experiences and the ones that we don't want to repeat, just sort of deciding between those.
Absolutely, because it's so important for not only the health of each individual, but the health of our industry in order to have, yes, we've had just the most incredible, the greatest masters of all time in the last century. But we also know that composers from Bach's time all the way down have had so many mental health illnesses and they were never talked about because there wasn't an opportunity for help.
For sure.
Musicians have suffered that, artists have suffered that for generations. Like, this is our chance. Also, I feel this as a responsibility. You were saying this earlier, but I feel this as part of my responsibility as a teacher. Like I said, I'm not a parent, but I think of my students as my kids.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that responsibility to help them in the best way.
Yeah, absolutely. That it doesn't become an egotistical endeavor, that it's really in their interests, what we're doing.
Exactly. So thank you again for sharing all of your insight, all of your knowledge and your expertise, and just for being here and having this conversation with me.
Oh, thank you, Pallavi. It was a real pleasure to talk to you as always. It's too long since we saw each other in Iceland, and I hope we get to talk again. It's really, really great what you're doing with this podcast.
Thank you all so much for listening. I am truly grateful for the support from each and every one of you. If you would like to submit any questions or topics for us to address on the show, you can send us a message on our Instagram page @ConsciousArtistPodcast. Help us to spread more awareness by sharing this episode with your friends, your colleagues, your teachers, and your students. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sending you all so much love and strength to tackle this week, and we'll see you next Monday for another episode of The Conscious Artist.